Good morning. We are 81. No, we are 82B. 82B towards the bottom. And we had this debate in our Mishnah. If you slaughter A and then C, and then you slaughter B. So there's two reasons why B should be prohibited. One, because it's the son of A, good morning. And one, because it's the parent of C. So that was a debate. Is it two sets of lashes or one? So, and we're trying to figure out who does the opinion of two sets of lashes go like? And we're going back and forth. Is it like sumchus or is it not like sumchus? So now, Tashma, acham mizek kazayis, sofeg shmoner, and Rabbi Omer, eno sofeg ella arbaim. So in this case, you're eating from the gira nasha, the sciatic nerve that's prohibited, and you there's two in front of you. There's two thighs in front of you, and you're eating a kazayis from each one. So now the rabbis say you're liable too. It's a kazayis of a forbidden food. The sciatica is forbidden, and therefore you're liable twice. Rabbi Yehuda says you're only liable 40 lashes, because Rabbi Yehuda says that only one of them, either the right or the left of the sciatica, are you liable? Not both. So therefore, you only get 40 lashes. Now the Gemara says, "Well, what's the case? Hey, chidami, you got warned not to eat one and you ate it, and then you got warned not to eat another one and you ate it. Ubishte hasros, it was two warnings. So my time under Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, why should you get any lashes? Hasra sapiki, v'shmeinu le Rabbi Yehuda, damar hasra sapik lo shme hasra." Rabbi Yehuda is not sure which one is the prohibited one, the right one or the left one. So each time you get warned is going to be a warning out of doubt, because this might not be the one. So that's called a warning out of doubt, and therefore that's two opinions. Is that considered a valid warning or not? Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to see in a second, is of the opinion it's not a valid warning. So therefore, why would you get any lashes? To get lashes, you have to get warned. But if you're not sure if it's the right one or the left one, each time you get warned, you're only going to violate the prohibition. And there's only a potential possibility you're going to violate the prohibition, because it might not be the prohibited sciatica. How do we know that Rabbi Yehuda holds a warning out of doubt is not considered a warning? Tanya, a lady got divorced, and you're supposed to wait 91 days before you go and get married again, because we're worried about pregnancy. Meaning, let's say she got divorced and she happened to be pregnant from her previous husband, and now she gets married and she gets pregnant. Now she doesn't wait 3 months. So now what's going to happen? The baby's going to be born. Let's say 9 months later, or let's say 7 months later. And the times of the Gemara, there's no 8-month babies. But so there, you don't know who's the father. Is the father the first husband, or is the father the second husband? If you wait 3 months, so then you'll know, because after 3 months, so after 3 months, if 9 months later there's a baby, you obviously know that it's not from the first husband. But if you don't wait, so then you're not sure. Now this kid's born, and he's not so happy, so he goes and he goes and punches each dad, punches dad 1 and punches dad 2, or curses dad 1 and curses dad 2. Or he knocked him out in one punch. Or he curses them both. So you're not allowed to hit your father. You're not allowed to curse your father. So the Brisa says you're chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda, though, which we're trying to prove that a warning out of doubt, meaning a warning which you're not sure if you violated a prohibition or not, is not considered a valid warning. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Omer b'bazakas chayiv, b'zachar zeh pater. If you hit both of them in one shot, so then you got warned not to hit your father, and you hit both of them in one shot, then you for sure violated something, because one of them is your father. However, if you do one after another, you get warned you can't hit your father, and you do it anyways, and then you go to the next guy and you get warned you can't hit your father, and you do it anyways. Well, each one of those warnings is only a potential that you're going to violate the prohibition because the guy might not be your father. So that's where we see that Rabbi Yehuda holds you are exempt, which now we want to know. So what's the case where you eat a olive's worth of the sciatic of the right thigh and then of the left thigh? And Rabbi Yehuda said you get 40 lashes. What's the case? Ela pshita bebas achas. You're eating both in one shot, meaning you have two olives worth on your plate, and you put them both in one shot. And you got one warning, ubahasra achas. So one warning, two olives worth, and yet we see that the first opinion holds you're liable 80 lashes. So we're asking, who's the author of that Mishnah? The rabbis in our case, when you have A and C and then you go and slaughter B, where it's two different reasons why you should be liable, one because it's the father, one because it's the child, and yet the rabbis say, even in that case, you're only liable for 40, for sure. In this case, they're not going to say you're liable 80. Must be elalav sumchasi. It must be sumchas of our Mishnah, who says that if you slaughtered A and then you slaughtered C and now you slaughter B, so A tells you can't slaughter B, C tells you can't slaughter B. If you go and do, it's one act and one warning, but the prohibition comes from two different places, therefore you're liable 80. That would fit nicely with this brisa. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not the case. La'olam b'zeh zeh. Really, you had one olive's worth, you got one warning, another olive's worth, and you had another warning, and then we asked, one second, if that's true, so how can Rabbi Yehuda say you get 40? Rabbi Yehuda's of the opinion that any warning without a guaranteed prohibition is not going to be a good warning. So that was our original question. So we're asking now that you're telling me it's really the zeh achar zeh, it's two different olives worth and two different warnings. So I understand why you get 80. So why do you only get 40 according to Rabbi Yehuda? So we say, B'hayitana savarlak idach tana Rabbi Yehuda, that holds the Amra Asra Savik Shmei Asra. And this brisa really holds like another opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. We have Rabbi Yehuda in another place, who says that really a warning out of a warning that you'll only potentially violate the prohibition is considered a valid warning. Where do I see that Rabbi Yehuda says that? Now, something you could ask, isn't it a contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda's? But it sounds like there's different opinions that have a different tradition of what Rabbi Yehuda held. So we say, so where do we see that Rabbi Yehuda holds that a hasra safek is a hasra, meaning when you get warned, even though it's not necessarily guaranteed you're going to violate the prohibition, but it's still considered a good warning, and therefore if you do it, you get lashes. The case of nosar, there's food of the sacrifice that you have to eat it before the next night. So you slaughter at 3 p.m. So by the morning it's got to be eaten already, and if you leave it over, then you have to burn it. So now says next page, in this case, what do you have? A positive commandment of burn the leftover sanctified food after the prohibition of do not leave it over. So it's coming to tell you she'ain lokin alav, that you don't get malchus. Now the question is, why don't you get malchus? Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda says you don't get malchus because there's a positive commandment, which is like a rectification of the negative commandment. But what do you see from here? If not for that, you would have got it lashes. Now, 1 second. At 3 p.m., you get warned, do not leave this food over. Well, there's no guarantee that you're going to leave it over or not. So you have plenty of time until the prohibition kicks in. So therefore, being warned at 3 p.m. would be a case of a hasra safek, because you'll say I have plenty of time. I have plenty of time. There's no guaranteed violation on the horizon, and therefore that's considered a hasra safek. And yet we see that Rabbi Yehuda says the only reason you don't get lashes is because there's a positive command following a negative commandment. But if not for that, you would say it's a good warning and you would get lashes, even though it's considered a warning without a guaranteed violation on the horizon. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yaakov, parenthetically, lo min Hashem b'zeh, elam yishuv l'havlei lav shem b'maisa, the kol lav shem b'maisa ain't lokin alav. Rabbi Yaakov said a different reason why there's no lashes, because it's a negative violation with no act. You sat back, relaxed, and enjoyed the food being left over. Therefore, it's also less stringent. When there's a negative violation without lashes, that's less stringent. Okay, so that's that. Now, another brisa trying to prove that it holds like sumchas. Tashma achol shnei gidin mishnei yerechos mishnei behemos. So a person eats two gidin, so two of the sadikas, which is prohibited, from two thighs, from two animals. And in this case, let's say it's talking about let's say the right one. So you have two animals, two thighs. They're both violation according to everybody. And now you eat from each one. So once again, two opinions. You get 80 lashes. That's Sofik Shmuel. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Eino Sofik Ela Arbaim. No, you only get 40. One sec. What's the case? My time, Rabbi Yehuda. Damar Arbaim. I don't understand. If it's warning, you had all his worth. Another warning, you had all his worth. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, why do you get 40 lashes? You should get 80 lashes. You got warned twice, two violations. So Ela Pshita Babasakas must be you put them all both in one time. Ubechada Hasra and in one warning. So now, okay, we understand why you get 40. Now the question is why you get 80. If it's only one warning, why do you get 80? So Man Tanakama, Ilema Rabbanan Pligalet, this was Hasam the Gufim Muklakim. Patri Rabbanan Hakalo Kol Shekain. Why do you get 80? So what do you want to say? It's the rabbis of our Mishnah that when you slaughter A and then you slaughter C, A is a reason to make you liable for slaughtering B, and C is a reason to make you liable for slaughtering B, and yet the rabbis say you're only liable 40. Well, for sure in this case, where it's the same prohibition, they're not going to say that you're liable 80. That doesn't make sense. Ela lav sumchasi. It must be the opinion of sumchas in our Mishnah that says when you slaughter B, you're liable 80. So to here, when you have two olives worth in one shot, so he'll say you're liable 80. Says Gemara, no, another rejection. The olam bezach arzet. Really, we're talking about where you got warned, you had one olive's worth, warned again, another olive's worth, and that the question is, I understand why you get 80 lashes. You got two warnings, two prohibitions. Why are you liable 40 lashes if you're Rabbi Yehuda? With the Ka'amers, my time, Rabbi Yehuda, the answer is the less be kazayas. You have to say the case is, or you have to say, you could say the case is a case where there isn't an olive's worth that you're consuming. And now there's two opinions. We know there's something called a beria, or something called that's sometimes when you have something which is like a whole creature. So in general, let's say in the world of nullification, so 60 times of food that's permitted will nullify the food that's prohibited. So, however, not if it's a beria. A beria, let's say it's a full-fledged bug, right? Not a part of it, but a full-fledged bug. So that even 60 times is not gonna nullify it. It has too much importance because it's a beria. So now in this case, right, better to find half more than a full one, 100%. So the case in Makos is you have a small little ant, but it's a full ant. So even though it's smaller than a usual size of a prohibition, it's not a kazayas, but it's a full ant, so you're still liable. So in this case, we're saying that there's no, in this case, we're saying a novelty that this sciatica is its own complete unit, and therefore, there's two opinions now. Do you view the sciatica as a complete unit or not? So according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's less bekazayis. The Tanya achlu v'embos guys chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad shebo kazayis. So the first opinion holds that you're going to get 80 lashes because we view the sciatica as its own unit, and therefore you're liable. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, there is no kazayis, and therefore you're only liable 40. One sec, why are you liable 40? You should be liable 0. Meaning, only one of them there's no kazayis. Sorry. Only one of them there's no kazayis. One of them there is a kazayis, and one there is no kazayis. So Rabbi Yehuda says, very simple. The one that has a kazayis, you're liable 40. The one that doesn't have a kazayis, you're not liable because you didn't have the right amount. according to the rabbis, even if only one of them doesn't have a kazayas, and one of them does, it doesn't matter because our measurement for the sciatica is much lower. It doesn't have to be a kazayas. We consider it a full unit. We consider it a full unit, which is interesting. It's like a little of a novelty because it's not like it's a full bug. It's really like an olive's worth of or less of a sciatica. But interesting. That can still be considered, I guess, its own unit. Yeah. 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 I'm wondering, is the whole sciatica only a kazayas worth?
Well, if the whole sciatica is not a kazai, that's when.
Oh, good, because right, if it's a part of the sciatica, so then that doesn't make so much sense. But if the sciatica is less than a kazai, so then that makes more sense. Meaning, in general, when you sell meat in the store, so right, so you name it different things. There's the breast and there's the thighs and so in this case too, how do you view it? The sciatica is just a part of the animal, and therefore it's not its own thing, or no? If the sciatica has its own prohibition, and therefore you do view it as its own unit, and therefore if the sciatica is less than a kazayas, so then you'll be liable even though it's not an olive's worth. Okay, so now you're a salesman, and the question is, when you just sold a mother animal to somebody, you're the shochet, and you just sold it to Ruvain. So 5 minutes later, Shimon comes in and wants to buy the child. Do you have to tell Shimon that you just sold the mother? Yes or no? So says the Mishnah Barba, Prokim Bishana Hamocher Behema Lechaver Tzarech Laodio Ima Macharti Lishchot Pita Macharti Lishchot. The assumption is that these animals are being sold for shechting, not for other things. So 4 times a year, there's an obligation on the mocher, on the seller, to say, I just sold the mother, or I just sold the child. When buyer number 2 comes, you have to tell him. Yeah. Now, this only if you sold it that day. We'll see. Like, you have to tell the guy, last week I sold the mother, and assume that he hasn't slaughtered it yet, and even today it's not slaughtered. That you don't have to do. But today, if you sold at 8 a.m. the mother and at noon the child, then you do have to say. But what's interesting is only 4 times a year this requirement. What are the 4 times a year? When there's more festive meals. So what are those times? The Eluhain, Erev Yom Tov Achron Shel Chag. So the eve of Shmini Atzeres. So the day before Shmini Atzeres, you have to inform them. The Erev Yom Tov Arishon Shel Pesach, and the eve of Pesach, the day before the first day of Pesach. The Erev Atzeres, and the day before Shavuos. The Erev Rosh Hashanah, and the day before Rosh Hashanah. Now, why not? Actually, why not the day before Sukkot? Sounds like they would have more festive meat and things like that on Shmini Atzeres. Interesting. Why not the day before Sukkot? I mean, the day before Pesach, we say you have to inform them. Why not the day before Sukkot? Sorry, because that's the day where, right? Okay, interesting. This is from somewhere else. Where is this from? Avodah Zarah. Yes, it's a special holiday, but the first that says also a special holiday. No, so Rashi in Avodah Zarah answers is that because when they had a lot of sacrifices, so if you didn't partake in the sacrifices the first 6 days of Sukkot, you still have the last day. That's the day there was much more meat available. After people were much more. That was like their last chance on some level to partake in the sacrifices on Sukkot. So that's why they would do that. And the day before Pesach is also because of all the Korban Pesachs. So it's not because of just it's a festive day, but it's a day that was abundant in sacrifices. So therefore people were shechting much more the day before Shmini Atzeres, the day before Pesach. Therefore you have to inform them, and also on Erev Rosh Hashanah. Okay, now maybe here you could ask the question, because Erev Rosh Hashanah, Rashi just says Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Tov, you eat meat. Okay, but according to that, the first day of Sukkot is also okay. Interesting. And like Kedivri Rabbi Yosef Glili, Af Erev Yom Kippurim Begalil. In the Galil, in the north of Israel, in the Galilee, they would have much more festive food on the day before Yom Kippur. Erev Yom Kippur, they would have much more festivities. Right, as the Gemara says, whoever eats a special mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur, so they would have a special, more festive in the Galil. Okay. So these times you have to inform. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Emasai Bezman she'ein lo revach. That's only if there wasn't any time, meaning it happened that day. You sold the animal, the mother, the child that day. Aval yesh lo revach, if you sold it yesterday, so you don't have to inform the person today that yesterday you sold the mother and assume that the guy hasn't checked it yet. That much is not upon the seller to have to do. So aval im yesh lo revach ein tzarich lo dio. Now, Umod Rabbi Yehuda will agree. Even if you sold a day ago or 2 days ago, the mother to the chassan and the daughter to the kala, so then you do have to inform them, even though it wasn't today, it was yesterday. Why? Them, you know, they're going to check on the same day because they're both partaking in the festivities of their wedding feast. So even though you usually don't have to inform people of what your purchases were yesterday or the day before, but a chassan and kala you do. Okay. Yeah. Now, barba brokim elu mashchitin es hatavach bal korcho afilu shor shav elav dinarim ve'ein lo lokech ela dinner kofanos olishot. So, in these 4 times, if the case is where the buyer already gave money, so the buyer the buyer gave money, gave a dinner to the seller. Now we're getting a little bit involved in what's considered a halakhic acquisition. Is just the mere transfer of money, or you have to actually do a mashicha, pull the animal. So we'll see, one's biblical, one's rabbinic, but in these 4 times, even if you didn't pull the animal into your domain and the animal remains by the seller's domain, we force the seller to shech the animal. Even if it's a super expensive animal, it doesn't matter. You have to shech it. Therefore, if the animal dies, so it's the loss of the buyer. Even though the buyer hasn't pulled the animal into its domain, it only paid for it. But these 4 times a year, we force the seller to sell because we view it in the domain of the buyer, and therefore, if it dies, so then that's the buyer's loss. Aval b'shar yemos hashana, but the rest of the year ain't okay. It's not like that. Just because the buyer gave money to the seller does not mean we force the seller to do it until the buyer pulls the animal into his domain. And if the animal dies before the buyer pulls into his domain, so therefore that's going to be the loss of the seller and not the loss of the buyer. Okay. If the seller never told the person that I sold the mother today, so we still allow the person to go and check the animal, and he doesn't have to, not check it out of a doubt that maybe the person already checked it. Okay. Now Rabbi Yehuda says, by the chassan and kala, even if you sold it in previous days, you have to inform them because we know that they're both slaughtering on the same day. The question of the Gemara is, though, the way the Mishnah phrases it, why the Mishnah say that you sold the mother to the chassan and the daughter to the kala? That's irrelevant. You just sold them to the chassan and kala. Why do you say the mother to the chassan and the child to the kala? That's just teaching you a parenthetical, something parenthetical that what? The orach ara, it was normal. The norm was lemitrach bei chasna tfei mi bei kalasa. The mother is more of a fatty animal, so it was more common that the chassan would have a bigger meal than the kala. I saw a reason why. Somebody brought down a reason. Yeah. Okay. Many more, I guess. Yeah. So fine. So now, says the Gemara, the 4 times a year that you force the seller to have to check the animal. What the question is, mashach. What do you mean the buyer never acquired the animal? You have to pull the animal to acquire it. It's one of the ways you acquire an animal. You do mashicha. He never acquired it. So why are you forcing the seller to have to check it? So Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, say the Mishnah is talking about kishamashach. No, it's a case where he did pull it. One second. If he did pull it, so how does the end of the Mishnah make any sense? That the rest of the year, you don't force him. Why not? If he pulled it, then it's his. The rest of the year, if the animal dies, so it's the seller's fault, meaning it's the seller's loss, not his fault. It's the seller's loss. So, but what do you mean? If the case is you pull the animal, so it belongs to the buyer, not the seller. Amar Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, what it means is like this. The seller gave money, the buyer gave money to the seller and never pulled the animal. However, the seller gave the animal to a third party to acquire for the buyer. So Reuven selling the animal to Shimon. Shimon's not there. And Shimon gave Reuven money. So what does Reuven do? He gives the animal to Levi. Levi pulls the animal into his domain. So now the Gemara says, okay, 4 times a year, it's a big schus. It's a merit. It's a merit to have more animals because these times a year, you're going to be slaughtering more. So that I understand. So you're allowed to be mezaka. You're allowed to merit somebody even when they're not there. If you know your friend really wants the watch, you could, you found it on the street. It's a beautiful Rolex, and your friend's a Rolex collector. You can acquire it on his behalf, even if he's not there. That's all good the 4 times of the year. So, you can acquire for somebody when they're not, even when they're not there. But the rest of the year, who's that the guy wants? Another big cow on his shoulders. You can't acquire for somebody else these things because it's not considered a benefit. He doesn't want this on his plate. Yeah. So you have to wait for the buyer himself to go and pull the animal. So that's all that the Mishnah is saying. That's the first opinion. Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he says no. Says Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, it depends. According to Rabbi Yochanan, that the way you acquire things monetarily is through transference of money. The way you acquire things rabbinically is through pulling it into your domain. 4 times a year, the rabbis establish the halacha on the biblical they establish that all you have to do is a biblical acquisition because they needed people to have the animals, to have their sacrifices. So there they said that as long as he gave the money, it belongs to him, and we forced the shochet, the seller, to give him the animal. However, the rest of the year, we go back to the normal halacha that was established by the rabbis that you have to do a mashicha. Now, Damar Rabbi Yochanan, Dvar Torah Mos Konos, it's biblical that you acquire through money transferring. But the question is, okay, but why did they establish that you have to acquire through pulling the animal? Isn't giving money enough? Umatam Amru Mashicha Kona, Zereshema Yomer Lo Nisru Chitecha Ba'aliyah. We're worried. What's going to happen? You're going to give money for a nice wheat sitting in Reuben's attic. So Shimon gives Reuben money, and now the wheat's there. Now what happens? Reuben's house catches fire. Reuben's not going to go out of his way to risk his life to go save Shimon's wheat. So we didn't want the buyers to lose out. So therefore we said, no, until you pull it, it doesn't belong to you. Therefore, when the house is being burnt, it still belongs to the seller, and he will go and save his own things. But to go and save your things, he's not necessarily going to do so fast. So therefore, to preserve that, we established the halacha that you have to do mashicha. You have to pull the animal, you have to pull the produce, and not just transfer money. Okay. Now, Yom Echad Ha'omer Ba'osu Has Beno Hayom Holech Achar Alayla. So this 1 day prohibition of slaughtering the child and the parent and the child in 1 day, Hayom Holech Achar Alayla. The day follows the nighttime. So meaning, if you slaughter it at nighttime, you have the full day, and the prohibition is still there. So if you slaughter at 9 p.m., you have until the following day at 9 p.m. or whatever. Let's say it gets dark. It gets dark at 9 p.m. like around nowadays. So you have until the next night. Once the night is over, that what do you call it? That it's then the prohibition is not gonna be there anymore. So as Zu Darish Rabbi Shimon ben Zoma Nemar b'Maisa Bereshit, it says in the creation of the world, Yom Echad. Nemar both says we know Yom Echad, and it says by a child and the parent that you can't slaughter them. Yom Echad, day one. Ma Yom Echad Amar b'Maisa Bereshit Yom Holek Achar Laila. Just like over there, it says Vayhi Erev Vayhi Boker, the day fall, the nighttime. Af Yom Echad Amar Boso Vesmeno Yom Holek Achar Laila. So too by this prohibition, the day follows the night. Taner Rabbanan Zu Darish Rabbi Shimon ben Zoma Lafisha Kol Inyan Kul Einam Medaber Ela Bekachim. Ubekachim Laila Holech Achar HaYom. So this Brisa says that Rabbi Shimon Zoma says that this whole section is placed right next to the whole section of Kachim, of sacrifices. It's all right in the middle of sacrifices. So just like by sacrifices, the night follows the day. Laila Holech Achar HaYom. So you would have thought that maybe the same thing would apply over here. Yachol Av Zekain. So we say no. Nemar kan Yom Echad, Nemar Ma'aser Bereshit Yom Echad, Yom Echad Hamor b'Ma'aser Bereshit Hayom Holek Achar Laila. Af Yom Echad Hamor Bosa Yom as Beno Hayom Holek Achar Laila. You would have thought that really the night follows the daytime, like by sacrifices. So that's what you would have thought, because it's placed in that whole section of sacrifices. To which we say that no, you have a Gzeir Shabbat teaching you that really the day follows the night and not the other way around. Next page, Rabbi Omer Yom Echad Yom HaMeyuchad Ta'un Charuz, that there's certain days in the year, these 4 days, that Yom Echad means that there's certain days of the year that require announcing, like these 4 days of the year, you have to announce that you sold the mother or you sold the child. Mikan Amru Ba'arba Prakim B'Shana Mocher Behem Alechaver Tzarech Lo Dio. Rabbi says that the source that you have to announce it is actually from this word Yom Echad in the Torah. So that you have to announce it is from here. That there's 4 specific days that it has to be announced. That concludes the chapter of this prohibition of slaughtering an animal and a child in one day. Now we move on to the mitzvah of Kisvei Dam, which we'll see now where and how it applies and all its details. Kisvei Dam, when you shecht an animal, you got to cover over with the dirt, you got to cover over the blood. So, Noeg ba'aretz u'b'chutzlaretz, it applies in Israel and outside of Israel. B'fnei habayis v'shlo b'fnei habayis, at the time of the temple and even when there's no temple. B'chulin, only by mundane animals. Avalo b'mekudash, and now we'll see why, that it does not apply by sacrifices. Meaning when you sacrifice an animal, we'll see the Gemara try to figure out why not, but there's no idea of putting the dirt on top of the blood that's on the altar. That you don't have to do, or that we'll see we can't do. The noeg b'chaya u'ba'of, it's specifically by a wild animal and a bird, but the noeg b'chaya u'ba'of mezuman u'b'she'ena mezuman, both a bird that's readily available and both a bird that's that you have to go trap, but not a domestic animal, not a behemoth. The noeg b'koi, and this koi that we don't know what it is, it might be an animal, a wild animal, it might be domesticated. And this we had earlier of Ein Shoktan Aso B'Yontif, V'Im Shoktu Ein Mechasin Es Damo. Ideally, we shouldn't slaughter this animal on Yom Tov because then we're going to have to cover the blood, and covering the blood is going to be a prohibition either of muktzah or maybe of a rabbinic prohibition of making a hole on Yom Tov, or maybe exerting too much effort. Either way, if you do it, we're not going to cover the blood, and therefore lechatchila, ideally one should not slaughter this koi on Yom Tov. Okay, so why do we not slaughter why is there no mitzvah of covering the blood by a sacrificial animal? Mukdashin my time alo, ilema mishum Rabbi Zer, Rabbi Zer Hashoket Afar Lemata Afar Lemala, Shnemar Vashapak has Damo Vichiso Afar Lemar Ela Be'afar Melamit Hashoket Shit Afar Lemata Afar Lemala the Hachalo Efshar. So maybe there's a technical reason why you can't. There's no mitzvah of covering the blood by a sacrificial animal, because Rabbi Zera says you have to have dirt. You have to have the dirt below and above. You have to put dirt. The blood has to go on dirt, and then you have to cover it with dirt. Well, if that's because it says in the Torah, bi'afar, you got to put it in the dirt, not just dirt in the dirt. What does in the dirt mean? You're putting it into dirt, and then you put dirt on top of it. So how would you do that by the sacrifices? Hey, chiliyavid. Well, let's see. Maybe you put dirt on the altar and you're mevatel it. It's like this is part of the altar now. I put the dirt now, and the dirt's part of the altar, and therefore the blood that's coming onto the altar is going to go onto the dirt. So says the Gemara, well, you can't just add on to the dimensions of the altar. So kamotz binyan uksib hakob ksav mi'ad Hashem. David HaMelech told you exactly how to build the base of Mikdash. You can't add. So you can't just take dirt and make it part of the altar. That doesn't work. So maybe you'll say, okay, so don't make it part of the altar. Just put it there. One second. You can't just put it there because then the blood, instead of hitting the altar, is going to hit the dirt. And then it's going to be a chatzitza. It's going to be an interposition. So chatzitza. So says the Gemara, okay. So he said, maybe this whole idea of putting dirt below is not necessarily is not a preventative. Maybe just ideal. Ideally, you should do it, but if not. Put the blood just so you still could just put the blood on the altar and then put dirt on top. Milo Tanya Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef Omer. I'll show you that this whole idea of putting dirt below the blood is only ideal, but it's not going to prevent the mitzvah. Because let's say shakat chaya, you slaughter a chaya, and therefore you have the blood of the animal there. The achar kach shakat behema, and then you slaughter a domestic animal. Pater mi lechasos. You're exempt from covering the blood because on top of the blood of the wild animal is now the blood of the domesticated animal, and therefore there's no mitzvah to cover the blood of the domesticated animal. However, behema, let's say you first slaughter the behema, the achar kach chaya, and then you slaughter the wild animal. Chayiv lechasos. There you still are liable to cover over the blood of the wild animal, even though what's below it, the blood of the domesticated animal. So you see, even the blood is not on dirt, it's on other blood, there's still a mitzvah to cover it over. So to that we say, no, it depends. We don't always say that there's no mitzvah to put the dirt under. We're going to invoke a famous principle of Rabbi Dovid. Rabbi Dovid says when you have flour and oil, 60 lug of oil, so you have to have enough that you're going to be able to mix it together. Even if you don't mix it together practically, it has to be able to mix together, as opposed to having 61 measurements of oil to the flour where it's unable to be mixed together. So that's the famous principle of Rabbi Dovid. Damar Rabbi Dovid called roy lebila and bila ma'keves bo, the kosh and roy lebila ma'keves bo. So whenever you have the ability to mix, so then that's fine. But if you don't have the ability to mix, so then it's not going to be good. So how does that apply over here? So he's saying that this animal, this chaya that you slaughtered after the behema, the wild animal, really under the wild animal, there could have been dirt there. Right now there isn't, but there could have been dirt there. It is fitting to put dirt under it. So even though right now you didn't do it, but that's still not going to prevent the mitzvah from taking place. However, on the altar, there is no possibility right now to put the dirt there. So even though you're right, if you have a situation where there is no dirt under, you still have a mitzvah to cover up the blood, but that's only in a case where there could be dirt under, like a regular case of slaughtering the animal. However, by the altar, right now there is no way to put the dirt under. So therefore, since there's no way to put the dirt under, there's no mitzvah to cover up the blood with dirt either. Yeah. So now the Gemara asks, okay, fine, why don't you do like this? The blood goes on the altar, take the blood off the altar and put it in dirt. Scrape off the blood off the altar, take it off the altar, and then put it in dirt and then cover it over. That'd be a good idea. Milo Tanan, did we not say Damanitas B'Shala Sakin Chayv L'Chasos? We said that the blood that spills out, but also the blood on the knife, Chayv L'Chasos. Even the blood on the knife of the slaughtering, you have to cover it up. How do you get it off? You take and you scrape it off and you put it on the dirt and you cover the dirt over. So Alma Digari Mechasile, Hachanami, Nigrar V'Nechasile. So to here you should scrape it off and cover it over. So says the Gemara, if we're talking about, let's say, a chatas, a regular animal that goes on the altar, so then hachinami sounds like you could do it. You are liable to cover over the blood. So, however, when our Mishnah said that there is no mitzvah by kachim, it was talking about hachamaya skinon bekache bedekabayis. It was talking about offerings that were offered their monetary value, not the offering themselves. And we'll start from this tomorrow. Okay. Wow. Jules.